blood is supposed to run thicker than water, but for 18-year-old Chloe Gallagher, it was the very thing that pulled her under. Stripped of everything by her own father and cast into the freezing dark, her sole inheritance was a rusted key to a cabin nobody wanted. What she found inside that cabin rewrote her entire life. Rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Gallagher estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, smearing the manicured grounds into a wash of colourless grey. Chloe Gallagher stood trembling in the middle of the mahogany-panelled study, her canvas duffel pressed hard against her ribs. It was her 18th birthday. No cake, no celebration, no warmth, just the cold, unblinking stare of her father, Richard Gallagher, CEO of Gallagher Global Logistics. "You made your choice, Chloe," Richard said through his teeth, tugging at the cuffs of his tailored Brioni suit. He wasn't looking at his daughter. He was looking at a failed asset. Quote 1. By the roaring fireplace, Beatrice, Chloe's stepmother, stood with practiced elegance, turning a glass of expensive Pinot Noir between manicured fingers. A thin smirk played across her mouth. "Richard, darling, don't work yourself up. You always knew this is where it would end. She's her mother through and through, stubborn, reckless, ungrateful." Chloe bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. "My mother built half this company before you forced her out, Dad. And Grandpa Nathaniel, do not speak of my father in this house." Richard's fist crashed onto the antique desk. Heavy crystal tumblers jumped and rattled. The violence in his voice sent Chloe a full step backward. __quote _5 __. Richard snatched a heavy brass letter opener, used it to shove a small, faded manila envelope across the polished mahogany. It slipped over the edge and landed with a sad little slap at Chloe's worn canvas sneakers. "There's the deed to his cabin," Richard continued, his voice dropping into something worse than anger. Absolute, surgical calm. "It's officially yours now. As of this moment, your trust fund is dissolved. Credit cards cancelled. Phone plan deactivated. You are no longer part of this family. You are no longer a Gallagher. Leave my house before I have private security drag you off the property." Chloe knelt, fingers shaking beyond her control, and lifted the envelope. Inside lay a single heavy iron key, mottled with decades of rust. It belonged to the cabin her grandfather, Nathaniel Gallagher, had disappeared into during the last 10 years of his life. Nathaniel had been a brilliant logistics engineer, a man who constructed a shipping empire from nothing, then walked away from all of it without explanation, surrendering the company to Richard. He died when Chloe was 14. His final will stated explicitly that the cabin would transfer to Chloe on her 18th birthday. Richard had contested it in probate court for 4 bitter years, arguing the land was prime real estate belonging to the corporation. Then, just days ago, he dropped the $1 million lawsuit without warning. Chloe refused to shed a single tear in front of them. She turned her back on the only home she had ever known, walked through the massive oak front doors, and stepped into the freezing October rain. Her canvas bag landed in the back seat of a beat-up 1998 Subaru Outback, the one possession in her name that Richard couldn't legally touch. She pulled through the towering wrought iron gates, and the adrenaline drained out of her like water through a cracked pipe. What replaced it was hollow, raw-edged panic. She eased onto the highway shoulder and opened her banking app. $412 in checking, half a tank of gas, and nowhere on earth to go. The drive from Connecticut into the deep, unforgiving woods of the Adirondacks stretched 6 brutal hours. The massive interstates gave way to narrow state routes, then to rutted logging roads, unpaved, half-washed out, hemmed in by pines so tall and bare they looked like bones against the sky. Her grandfather had been her only real family. Richard demanded flawlessness. Beatrice poisoned everything she touched. But Nathaniel was shelter. He taught Chloe to carve wood with a pocket knife, to find her way by starlight, to see what others refused to look for. Quote 8, he'd say, something sad and knowing flickering behind his eyes. They never bother to check the canvas underneath. Full dark had consumed the forest by the time her headlights caught a dented, rust-eaten mailbox, tilting hard to one side. Faded white numbers. 842, Hollow Creek Road. She turned onto the gravel drive, choked with weeds, soft with mud. Her tires spun. The cabin materialized from the darkness like something the woods had tried to swallow whole. It was worse than anything she'd prepared herself for. The roof buckled under a thick mat of soaked pine needles. Porch steps had rotted clean through. Ivy, dense, suffocating, had consumed half the exterior walls. This was her inheritance, a collapsing shack in the dead center of nowhere. For one sharp, terrible moment, Chloe folded over the steering wheel and wept. Maybe Richard had been right. Maybe Nathaniel had truly lost his mind. Morning light filtered through the pine canopy, throwing long, dusty shafts across the cabin's gutted living room. Chloe woke shaking on a moth-eaten canvas sofa. A thin wool blanket from her car trunk was wrapped tight around her shoulders. Daylight made everything worse. Dust blanketed every surface in thick layers. Floorboards bowed and groaned beneath her weight. The air tasted of mildew, damp soil, and decaying paper. She spent hours ripping down cobwebs, dragging waterlogged furniture out onto the lawn. Her stomach cramped hard, a blunt reminder of a bank account bleeding toward zero. She needed a plan. Sell the 20 acres, or at minimum, make the cabin livable before winter closed in. Around noon, the crunch of heavy boots on gravel. Chloe went rigid. Her pulse slammed against her ribs. She grabbed a solid iron fire poker from the stone hearth and moved to the window, pressing close to the filthy glass. A tall man in a red flannel shirt and a worn canvas jacket stood beside her Subaru. He was studying her Connecticut plates. Chloe pushed the front door open, the poker held low behind her thigh. "Can I help you?" Her voice came out steadier than her hands. The man startled, spinning around. Weathered face, calloused hands. Hazel eyes that were unexpectedly gentle. "Whoa, sorry there, didn't mean to spook you." "Name's Tobias. Tobias Hayes. I live about 3 miles down the ridge. Nobody's set foot at the old Gallagher place in close to 4 years. Saw fresh tire tracks and figured squatters, maybe teenagers." "I'm Chloe," she said, stepping carefully onto the groaning porch. "Nathaniel Gallagher was my grandfather. This property is mine now." Tobias let out a low whistle, pulled off his faded cap, and ran a hand through dark hair. "Well, I'll be damned. Nathaniel's granddaughter. You've got his eyes, no question. But listen, miss, you sure you're supposed to be here right now? Your dad's corporate people were out here just last week." Chloe's hand found the doorframe. Her knuckles went white. Quote, 15. Quote, 16. Tobias shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Quote, 17. Quote, the air left Chloe's lungs. Richard had dropped the probate suit. He'd handed her the deed yesterday, knowing she was broke, knowing she'd come straight here. But why dispatch a demolition crew before she'd even taken possession? If the cabin was genuinely worthless, why pour tens of thousands into flattening it with such urgency? __quote _18__. Chloe said slowly, her thoughts spiraling through terrifying possibilities. Quote 19, quote 20. Tobias answered, gesturing toward the front door. Quote 21. Quote. Chloe swallowed hard. Quote 22. Quote. After Tobias left, reassuring her the neighbors looked out for one another, Chloe bolted the heavy door. Her mind wouldn't stop spinning. Her grandfather hadn't simply retreated into the woods, he had fortified this cabin like a vault. She tore through the room, exhaustion obliterated by raw adrenaline. Old wooden bookshelves, emptied, kitchen cabinets, bare, loose rotting rugs, ripped aside. There had to be a reason Richard wanted this specific place reduced to rubble so desperately. He didn't care about the heavily wooded acreage. He wanted to bury something. Hours bled away. Caked in soot, sweat, and spiderwebs, Chloe collapsed onto the floorboards before the massive stone fireplace. She stared at the blackened bricks, utterly defeated. Her grandfather's cryptic words circled back again. "The world only sees the paint, Chloe. They never bother to check the canvas." She fished the rusted key from her pocket. It had turned the front lock without resistance, but under direct sunlight, something nagged at her. The key was unusually long, its teeth, intricate, asymmetrical, far too complex for any standard deadbolt. Chloe crawled toward the massive fireplace on her hands and knees. Her trembling fingers traced the cold, rough stones of the hearth. She remembered Nathaniel's obsession with masonry. "Stones hold deep memories," he used to say. She pressed into the thick mortar joints. Nothing. She shifted to the heavy wooden mantelpiece, studying the hand-carved panorama. Pine trees, bears, wolves, all whittled by Nathaniel's own hands. Wait, the wolf on the far right edge. Its eye was different, an empty hole, perfectly round and impossibly deep, unlike any of the others. Chloe held her breath. Her hands trembled as she raised the rusted key and guided it into the wooden wolf's eye. It glided in without resistance, a perfect fit. She turned it to the right. A deep mechanical clack reverberated from somewhere behind the stone wall. Then, the entire right section of brickwork began swinging inward on concealed heavy-duty steel hinges, revealing a dark, narrow concrete staircase descending straight beneath the cabin's foundation. Stale, freezing air rushed against Chloe's face. She pulled out her phone, switched on the LED flashlight, and gripped the iron fire poker tight in her right hand. Step by terrifying step, she lowered herself into pitch-black darkness. The basement bore no resemblance to the rotting cabin above, not even close. Perfectly preserved, immaculately clean. Thick, bunker-grade concrete walls on every side. Modern, high-end dehumidifiers hummed in the corners, somehow still powered by an independent grid. At the center of the vast room stood a massive, state-of-the-art server rack. Faint green and blue lights blinked steadily, connected to a sprawling, off-grid solar battery bank. But the glowing servers weren't what made Chloe drop the heavy iron fire poker onto the concrete floor with a sharp clang. Against the far wall, 10 wooden pallets, stacked with precision. Hundreds of heavy, olive-green canvas bags sat on top of them. One bag had tipped over. Its contents lay scattered across the floor. Heavy, gleaming gold Krugerrand coins caught her phone's light. Millions of dollars in untraceable physical wealth. And in the center of the room, spread across a massive steel drafting table, hundreds of highly classified blueprints, legal contracts, surveillance photographs. Pinned to the center of a large corkboard was a high-resolution photo of her father, Richard Gallagher, shaking hands with a notorious, internationally sanctioned arms dealer. A thick red marker had slashed a vicious, jagged X across Richard's smiling face. Underneath that nightmare of a photograph, scrawled in her grandfather's urgent but meticulous hand, sat a massive leather ledger. This wasn't some record of shipping lanes or cargo manifests. This was a catalogue of illegal arms deals, political payoffs funneled to sitting senators, precise logs tracking contraband moved through shadow corridors spanning the globe, all under the banner of Gallagher Logistics. Nathaniel hadn't lost his mind. He'd uncovered the truth. His own son had gutted the family empire from the inside, hollowed it out, and rebuilt it as a front for a sprawling international criminal operation. And Nathaniel had spent his final decade alive, quietly, patiently, constructing the ultimate dead man's switch, something no one could dismantle. Chloe moved toward the desk. Her reflection ghosted across the dark screen of a computer terminal. She lifted a thick, leather-bound journal positioned neatly atop the ledger. Stamped into the cover in brilliant gold leaf was a single line. For Chloe, use the gold to survive, and use the truth to burn his empire to the ground. She hadn't just been cast out, she'd been appointed executioner. Ice-cold adrenaline surged through her as she stood before the glowing terminal deep in that underground bunker. The green cursor blinked on the oversized curved Dell monitor, mocking her. Nathaniel had engineered this digital guillotine with surgical precision. But the system sat locked behind military-grade encryption. One prompt waited at the center of the black screen: identify the canvas. Chloe dropped into the heavy Herman Miller chair, her thoughts spiraling back to those summers on the porch overhead, whittling wood, listening. The world only sees the fresh paint, Chloe. They never bothered to check the canvas underneath. Her fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard, shaking. What was the canvas? She cycled through his paintings, his books, those yellowed nautical charts. Then it hit. The afternoon he taught her to grind minerals with linseed oil to make pigment. He'd painted a small, clumsy sailboat on a scrap of rough canvas, flipped it over, written a date on the back, the date her mother died. Her hands moved fast. August 1st 4, 2006. The screen pulsed red. Access denied. 2 attempts remaining. Panic locked around her throat like a fist. A localized security system like this, fail the password and the entire hard drive could wipe itself clean. She squeezed her eyes shut, tried to recall the exact carving etched into the fireplace upstairs. The wolf, the blind eye. His voice surfaced again, warning her about Richard. Your father builds cages, Chloe. I build keys. Her eyes snapped open. The canvas wasn't a painting at all. The canvas was the foundation, the bedrock beneath Gallagher Global Logistics itself. She typed the original incorporation date, followed by the name of his first cargo vessel. 1978, Providence. The screen blazed solid blue. A progress bar streaked across the monitor, and then thousands of nested folders erupted across the desktop. Chloe opened the master directory, the Carthage files. What filled that screen made her stomach fold in on itself. Nathaniel hadn't gathered whispers and hearsay. He had intercepted and archived terabytes of internal corporate communications, banking records, and encrypted satellite imagery. She clicked into a folder labeled Antwerp Customs. High-resolution photographs filled the screen. Gallagher shipping containers, officially logged as heavy agricultural equipment destined for Eastern Europe, being offloaded by armed paramilitary units. The corresponding invoices traced payments through phantom shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. A separate document titled Project Chimera laid bare how Richard circumvented federal export controls by breaking down advanced drone systems and shipping individual components disguised as civilian automotive parts. She had to copy everything, now. She tore through the drawers of the steel drafting table until her hand closed around a heavy, rubberized Kingston iron key flash drive. She jammed it into the terminal and launched a mass transfer. The progress bar materialized. Estimated time, 14 minutes. Then a sound from the world above, the unmistakable slam of a vehicle door. Chloe went rigid. The security monitors bolted above the server rack blinked awake. Exterior cameras, concealed inside birdhouses and hollowed-out tree trunks, revealed a black Cadillac Escalade parked hard on the front lawn. These were not the slapdash demolition types Tobias had warned her about. 4 men emerged from the vehicle, dressed in crisp, dark tactical gear, moving in lockstep like a unit that had rehearsed violence. Leading them was a face Chloe knew immediately from her father's corporate galas, Victor Sterling. On paper, he held the title of Vice President of Risk Management at Gallagher Logistics. In practice, he was Richard's personal fixer, a man whose entire career was built on making multi-million-dollar complications vanish without a trace. Victor drew a suppressed pistol from his shoulder holster, motioning 2 of his men toward the cabin's perimeter. Chloe stared at the monitor, paralyzed. The data transfer sat at 30%. Above her, the floorboards shrieked under impact, a steel battering ram against the reinforced front door. Thud, thud, crack. Splintering wood echoed down the concrete stairwell. Then, heavy, deliberate footsteps. Victor Sterling crossing the living room. "Tear the place apart!" His voice filtered down the shaft, muffled and surgically cold. Richard said the old man was paranoid. Look for false walls, floor safes, anything irregular. A pause. And if the girl is here, you know the protocol. Chloe's breath seized in her throat. The protocol. Her own father had sanctioned a kill order on her. The progress bar dragged itself to 70%. Overhead, furniture shattered, books ripped from shelves, floorboards pried loose. It was only a matter of time before someone examined that massive stone fireplace. __quote _27__. One of the mercenaries appeared on the monitor feed. Victor's face filled the hidden camera's frame. Chloe couldn't wait. At 92%, she ripped the Kingston drive from the USB port, accepting whatever she'd captured. She jammed the drive into her pocket, snatched Nathaniel's leather ledger, and unzipped the canvas duffel. She dumped her clothes onto the floor and started cramming fistfuls of heavy gold Krugerrand coins into the bag. 40 pounds was all she could carry before the weight became impossible. But 40 pounds was enough to survive. She needed a way out. Her eyes tore across the bunker walls. Behind the massive server rack, half hidden by thick tangles of Ethernet cabling, a heavy circular steel hatch. Nathaniel would never have built a panic room with only one exit. She ran for it, hauling the duffel over her shoulder. She grabbed the rusted iron wheel and twisted. It screamed in protest, metal grinding against metal. Upstairs, Victor froze. "Did you hear that? Beneath the floor. Blow the hinges on the fireplace, now." Chloe threw every ounce of her weight against the wheel, cracking the rust seal free. The hatch swung wide, revealing a dark, narrow, corrugated metal pipe angling downward into the earth. She dove in head first, dragging the heavy bag of gold behind her, just as a deafening explosion tore through the cabin above. Dust and concrete rained into the bunker as the concealed door was blown apart. Chloe clawed her way down the pitch-black tunnel, knees scraping against cold, jagged metal. The pipe stretched endlessly. The air turned damp and thick, heavy with iron and wet clay. Behind her, Victor's men flooded the bunker, their shouts echoing off the walls. Victor's roar chased her down the pipe. "Find the tunnel exit! Call Richard! Tell him the asset has gone rogue!" Chloe pushed harder. Her lungs burned. Then, a thin sliver of moonlight. She forced through a heavy grate buried beneath dense blackberry bushes and tumbled into the freezing mud of the forest floor. Roughly 200 yards from the cabin, down near the roaring creek. She did not look back. She pressed the heavy bag of gold against her chest and sprinted into the dense, merciless woods. The rushing water swallowed the sound of her desperate footsteps. The shadow war had officially begun. Rain slicked the neon-lit streets of Syracuse as Chloe pulled the Subaru into a dark, forgotten alley behind a crumbling strip mall. 2 full days had passed since the bunker. She'd stayed off every major highway, sleeping in the car with doors locked and a tire iron laid across her lap. Exhausted, starving, painfully aware she was the most wanted woman on the entire East Coast. She pulled the hood of her damp sweatshirt up and stepped into a brightly lit, barred window shop called Dominic's Gold and Silver. Cheap cigars and ammonia. The smell hit her immediately. The man behind the bulletproof glass didn't bother looking up from his phone. Chloe slid 2 heavy Krugerrands through the metal slot. "I need cash, unmarked, small bills." The pawnbroker raised a jeweler's loupe, turning the gold over carefully. His eyes went slightly wider. "Mint condition South African imports. Serious weight. I'll give you 3 grand for the pair. Take it or leave it." Robbery in broad daylight. Those coins were worth nearly 4 times that number. But a legitimate bank meant a paper trail, and a paper trail meant a body bag. "Deal," she said, flat and cold. She stuffed a fat stack of $20 bills into her pockets, then walked to a nearby electronics store for a cheap prepaid burner phone and a refurbished Dell laptop. A dingy roadside motel, cash on the counter, deadbolt thrown. She sat on the sagging mattress, booted the laptop, and inserted the Kingston drive. She needed a megaphone, someone with the reach and the spine to crack open a multi-billion-dollar empire without getting buried in the process. hours of research into independent investigative journalists. Then she found him, Jonathan Reed, Pulitzer-winning senior correspondent for the Sentinel, an aggressive independent news bureau operating out of Washington, D.C. The man had a track record of gutting corrupt corporate giants and an iron rule: he never revealed his sources. Through an encrypted email client, she sent one message: "I have the Carthage files. Gallagher Global Logistics is a front. Meet me in Philadelphia, 30th Street Station, tomorrow at noon." She attached a single, heavily redacted invoice from the Antwerp shipments as proof. 10 minutes later, her screen lit up. "I'll be the guy reading a 1998 copy of Wired magazine. Bring everything." The following afternoon, the massive vaulted ceilings of 30th Street Station echoed with thousands of rushing commuters. Chloe sat at a small round table near a busy coffee kiosk, her gaze sweeping the crowd in sharp, nervous passes. She spotted him without effort. Jonathan Reed, late 40s, rumpled tweed jacket, holding the vintage magazine exactly as promised. She stood, grabbed her coffee, walked past him and dropped a folded napkin onto his table. It read, "Follow me to the Amtrak quiet car, train 84. 10 minutes later, the train lurched forward, pulling away from the station. Chloe took a window seat, the heavy canvas bag pressed securely between her feet. Jonathan settled into the seat across from her, eyes sharp and appraising. "You're Richard Gallagher's kid," he said quietly, barely above a whisper. "The one who just got disowned. Tabloids can't stop talking about you." "The tabloids don't know a thing," Chloe replied, sliding the encrypted laptop across the narrow table. "My grandfather spent the last decade of his life building this. Richard is moving military-grade hardware for sanctioned cartels and paramilitary groups across Eastern Europe and Africa." Jonathan opened the laptop, started scrolling through the decrypted files. For a long stretch, the only sound was the rhythmic clatter of wheels on track. Color drained from his face, slowly, steadily, like watching someone bleed. "My God," Jonathan whispered, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "This isn't just a corporate scandal. Half the Senate Maritime Committee is implicated. There are wire transfers linking Gallagher Logistics to private mercenary outfits the CIA has been chasing for years." "Can you publish it?" Chloe asked, fingers white-knuckled on the table's edge. __quote_44__. Jonathan didn't respond right away. He was squinting at a specific series of offshore bank routing numbers laid out in Nathaniel's ledger. He reached into his own bag, pulled out a specialized reference drive, and cross-referenced the digits. __quote_45__. Jonathan spoke slowly, lifting his gaze to meet hers with an expression that could freeze steel. Chloe pulled the laptop closer, frowning hard. Jonathan tapped the screen with one finger. The air evacuated from Chloe's lungs. Her blood went cold, instant, total cold. "Croft, that's Beatrice's maiden name, my stepmother. Your father isn't the architect here, Chloe." Jonathan's voice carried a weight like funeral dirt. _52_. Before Chloe could absorb that grotesque truth, Jonathan's burner phone rattled violently against the table. He looked at the screen. His eyes blew wide with raw shock. He slammed the laptop closed and seized Chloe's arm. His tone left zero room for debate. Chloe pulled back, demanding an answer. Jonathan turned the phone screen toward her. A breaking news banner from CNN filled the display. __quote_5___. Beatrice hadn't just leveled the cabin. She had killed Tobias, pinned the explosion on Chloe, then turned the entire federal apparatus loose on an 18-year-old girl. Chloe stared through the window as the world smeared past. The reality sank in like a blade between ribs. She wasn't fighting a corrupt CEO anymore. She was at war with an international syndicate, and there was no ground left to stand on. Rain hammered the shattered skylights of an abandoned textile mill on the outskirts of North Philadelphia. Jonathan had pulled Chloe off the train 2 stops ahead of schedule, commandeered a delivery truck to reach this forgotten, off-grid refuge. Dust particles drifted through pale shafts of streetlight, leaking past filthy windows. Jonathan's fingers flew across a heavy, military-grade field laptop, bypassing standard providers to connect through an encrypted satellite uplink. Beatrice's people have already compromised the cell networks. Sweat gathered at his temples. They pushed that FBI alert to cut you off completely. Walk into a police station right now, and you'll suffer a fatal accident in holding before a lawyer even knows your name. We broadcast the Carthage files to every major global outlet simultaneously. That's the only shield we have. Chloe paced the cracked concrete, arms locked tight around herself. The heavy canvas bag of gold slumped in the corner, less lifeline now, more dead weight. How long until the upload finishes? 10 minutes. Jonathan struck the enter key. A progress bar materialized on screen, crawling agonizingly toward 2%. Once this reaches the dark web and international press servers, Beatrice's shadow empire collapses. Treasury, Interpol, the CIA, they'll have no option but to move. But we're exposed until that bar hits 100. Footsteps rose from the factory's lower levels. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Chloe's blood went to ice. She backed from the stairwell, eyes scanning the cavernous space for anything, a weapon, a tool, a shard. Nothing but rusted machinery and hollow wooden crates. Jonathan's hands left the keyboard. He reached slowly into his tweed jacket and drew a compact silver revolver. __quote _61____. The voice cut through the darkness like a surgical blade. Victor Sterling materialized from the gloom, wholly unbothered by the savage weather. A suppressed tactical pistol sat steady in his grip, leveled at Jonathan's chest. 2 heavily armed mercenaries flanked him. Their laser sights burned red dots onto the journalist's jacket. __quote _62___. Chloe's voice shook, but it did not break. How did you find us? You left a digital crater when you pinged that offshore account from the train, Victor said. His face betrayed nothing. He leveled his weapon toward the laptop. Cancel the transfer, now. It's a dead man's switch, Jonathan lied without blinking, hands raised. I cancel it. The data fragments instantly. Emails itself to 1,000 random recipients. Victor smirked and stepped closer. I've called bluffs from better men than you. Shoot him. Wait! Chloe screamed, throwing herself directly between Victor's men and Jonathan. Victor, you don't want to do this. You don't even know who you're working for. Victor let out a laugh, dry, hollow, utterly humorless. I work for your father, Chloe, and he is very, very disappointed in you. My father is a puppet, Chloe shouted, her voice ricocheting off the brick walls. Beatrice controls the offshore accounts. She runs Beechercroft Holdings. Do you honestly believe she'll let you walk away when this ends? She detonated the cabin. She murdered Tobias Hayes. She's cleaning house, Victor, and you are the hired help. Victor's eyes tightened, just barely. For a professional who built his identity on total control, the mention of Beechercroft Holdings landed like a blade. My grandfather didn't just document the shipments, Chloe pressed, reading his hesitation. He documented the payouts. Look at the screen, Victor. Look at the routing numbers. Jonathan caught the cue. He tapped a single key with careful precision. The screen divided. Left side, the upload progress bar crawling past 60%. Right side, a detailed ledger revealing massive recurring transfers from Beechercroft Holdings to a private Swiss bank account. That's your retirement fund, isn't it? Chloe asked. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Check the status. Victor squinted at the glowing monitor. The status beside his multi-million-dollar Swiss account pulsed in bright red letters. Liquidated. Funds routed. She emptied your accounts an hour ago, Chloe said quietly. The moment we got out of the bunker, Beatrice knew the empire was crumbling. She's incinerating the evidence, Victor.
And you're the one holding the match.
The factory went dead silent. Nothing but the relentless hammering of rain. The laser sights trained on Jonathan wavered. Victor lowered his weapon, a fraction of an inch. His jaw clenched so hard the bone looked ready to crack. He drew a sleek satellite phone from his pocket, hit speed dial. 10 agonizing seconds passed. "The number you have reached is no longer in service." A robotic voice, flat, final. Beatrice had severed the line. Victor stared at the phone, then at Chloe. The cold, methodical enforcer suddenly wore the expression of a man who just realized he was standing on a landmine. Without one word, Victor holstered his weapon, signaled his team, and pivoted on his heel, vanishing into the darkness as swiftly as he'd materialized. He wasn't pursuing Beatrice. He was dissolving into the wind. Ding! Chloe and Jonathan spun around. The screen blazed solid green. Transfer complete. Packets delivered to 412 global addresses. "It's done," Jonathan breathed, sinking back into his chair. "It's over." By sunrise, the world Chloe had known lay in ruins. The Carthage files detonated across every major television network and digital outlet on Earth. The volume of evidence was staggering, undeniable. Interpol issued immediate red notices. The FBI stormed the Gallagher Logistics corporate headquarters in Manhattan, seizing servers, freezing billions in assets. Richard Gallagher was arrested on the manicured lawn of his Greenwich estate. He looked utterly lost as federal agents locked cuffs around his wrists. He had been entirely blind to the scope of Beatrice's shadow operations, but ignorance offered no legal shelter. Beatrice nearly escaped. She was intercepted on a private tarmac in Teterboro, New Jersey, moments from boarding a Gulf Stream bound for a non-extradition country. When authorities tore through her luggage, they recovered millions in bearer bonds, and the exact detonator frequency used to obliterate Nathaniel's cabin. 1 week later, Chloe stood on the muddy, scorched foundation of her grandfather's destroyed cabin in the Adirondacks. The federal government had publicly exonerated her of all charges, issuing a formal apology and recognizing her as a national whistleblower. The air bit clean and sharp, heavy with pine, thick with freshly turned earth. Chloe reached into her pocket. Her fingers closed around the rusted key, dense and cold. The only thing that had survived the fire without a scratch. She'd used the gold Krugerrands to retain the best environmental lawyers money could buy. Gallagher Logistics was being systematically dismantled, liquidated piece by piece. But these 20 pristine acres of mountain forest, they remained hers. "You were right, Grandpa," Chloe whispered into the wind. Her eyes swept across that endless green canopy stretching to the horizon. They didn't check the canvas, but we did. Her journey, from a disowned teenager cast into nothing to the woman who dismantled an international crime syndicate, stands as proof. The truth doesn't stay buried, it claws its way out of the dark, every single time. If this story hit you somewhere real, leave a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more, and tell us, what would you have done with the gold? Drop your answer below.